The quiet darkness masked the deadly danger lurking within the walls of the Johnson family home as they slept peacefully, unaware of what was about to unfold. Smoke began to seep silently under bedroom doors while the electrical fire sparked behind. The living room wall growing stronger with each passing minute. No one stirred. No one sensed the approaching disaster. No one except for Max, the rescue dog they had adopted just 3 weeks earlier from the local shelter. Before we continue this heartbreaking yet miraculous story, if you love animals and believe in their incredible ability to sense danger and save lives, please subscribe to our channel now so you don't miss any more extraordinary tales of heroism and survival. Max wasn't the dog they wanted. With his scarred face, mismatched ears, and nervous disposition, he had been passed over countless times at the shelter. Even the Johnsons had hesitated when the children begged to take him home. Now, as the flames began their deadly dance through the family's home, this unwanted dog would make a decision that would change everything. The Johnsons were just like any other family on Maple Street, hardworking, busy, and always rushing from one obligation to the next. Sarah Johnson, a dedicated nurse at the local hospital, juggled night shifts with being a mother to 3 energetic children. Her husband Mark worked as a construction foreman, leaving the house before dawn and returning with calloused hands and a weary smile. Between soccer practice, piano lessons, and homework, their lives moved at a relentless pace that left little room for anything else. 5-year-old Emily was the youngest, a curious girl with blonde pigtails and a missing front tooth who had fallen in love with Max the moment she saw him at the shelter. 8-year-old Jake was the middle child, more interested in video games than the new family pet. And 12-year-old Michael, the oldest, had initially shown interest in Max, but quickly lost enthusiasm when the dog didn't immediately perform tricks like his friend's purebred golden retriever. "Oh, that dog is acting weird again," Sarah had mentioned to Mark just yesterday morning, watching as Max paced nervously near the living room wall, occasionally stopping to press his nose against the outlet. "He keeps sniffing at that socket and whining." Mark had barely looked up from his coffee and construction blueprints. "Probably just smells a mouse or something. This old house has plenty of them." The house on Maple Street was indeed old, built in the 1970s, and showing its age in more ways than creaky floors and outdated wallpaper. Mark had been meaning to address the electrical issues for months. The signs were there, lights flickering. When the microwave ran, the slight burning smell when too many appliances were plugged in, the circuit breaker tripping at least once a week. "We should really get an electrician to look at the wiring," Sarah had suggested more than once. Mrs. Henderson next door had her whole house rewired last year, said it was a fire waiting to happen. But there was always something more pressing. Michael's braces, the leak in the upstairs bathroom, the car transmission that needed replacing. The electrical work could wait, Mark always reasoned. They'd been living with these minor inconveniences for years without incident. That same morning, when Sarah had left for her shift, Max had followed her to the door, whimpering softly as she stepped outside. He'd stood there watching through the window long after her car had disappeared, his tail low, his eyes darting back to that living room wall. "Stop being so dramatic," Mark had muttered to the dog as he gathered his tools. "She'll be back tonight." But Max's strange behavior had continued throughout the day. When Emily returned from kindergarten, she found him lying in front of the electrical panel in the hallway, refusing to move even when she offered him a treat. Later, while Jake played video games, Max had paced restlessly behind the television stand, sniffing at the tangle of cords and whining. "Dad, can you make Max stop being annoying?" Jake had called out. "He keeps getting in the way of my game." Mark had simply closed the living room door, shutting Max out. "Problem solved," he'd said, ruffling Jake's hair. "Now beat that level for me." By dinner time, Sarah had returned from her shift, exhausted but cheerful, as she prepared spaghetti and meatballs, the family favorite. Max had sat unnaturally still in the kitchen doorway, watching the family eat, refusing the food Emily sneaked to him under the table. "Is he sick?" Sarah had wondered aloud, putting a hand on Max's head to check for fever. "He hasn't eaten all day, according to the kids." "Maybe he's finally learning some manners," Mark had joked. "Remember how he wolfed down an entire chicken? Last week when you turned your back?" They had laughed, dismissing the dog's behavior as just another quirk of their strange new pet. After dinner, the family had settled into their usual evening routine: homework at the kitchen table, a bit of television, showers, and bedtime stories for Emily. Throughout it all, Max had remained vigilant, moving from room to room, his attention always returning to that living room wall where the main electrical panel connected to the house's aging wiring system. "Maybe we should take him to the vet tomorrow," Sarah had suggested, as she and Mark prepared for bed, watching Max circle their bedroom before settling uneasily by the door. "Let's give it another day," Mark had replied, already half asleep. "Dogs, probably just still adjusting. The shelter said he might be anxious for a while." Sarah had nodded, too tired to argue. They'd only had Max for 3 weeks, a last-minute decision after Emily had fallen in love with the scarred, nervous dog that nobody else wanted. The shelter had warned them he might have some behavioral issues given his unknown background. "Good night." "Boy," Sarah had whispered to Max, "try to get some sleep." But Max hadn't slept. Even as the house fell silent and still, the rescue dog remained alert, his ears twitching at every creak and groan of the old house settling for the night. His eyes never left the bedroom door, as if he were standing guard against an invisible enemy. Behind the walls, where no human eye could see, the house's decades-old wiring had begun to fail. A small spark jumped between frayed wires, then another. The insulation, brittle with age, began to smolder, and as the Johnson family slept peacefully in their beds, unaware of the danger growing within their walls, Max's sensitive nose detected what they could not: the first faint traces of electrical fire. But by then, it was already too late to prevent what was coming. The stage was set for a night that would change their lives forever. At 2:17 a.m., while the Johnson family slept peacefully in their beds, the initial spark in the living room wall grew into something more dangerous. Behind the drywall, where a junction box connected the home's aging wiring system, a copper wire had finally worn through its brittle insulation. Each time the refrigerator compressor kicked on, the exposed wire brushed against a metal fastener, creating a tiny spark. Under normal circumstances, the circuit breaker should have tripped. But the home's electrical panel, installed in the 1970s and never updated, had grown as tired and worn as the wires it was meant to protect. The faulty breaker failed to detect the small but consistent power surge, allowing the dangerous condition to persist. As the refrigerator cycled on and off throughout the night, each spark ignited a bit more of the dust and insulation inside the wall. At first, it was barely a glow, just a pinpoint of heat and light that would die down when the spark ended. But gradually, inevitably, these brief moments of combustion created a tiny ember. The ember found more fuel in the decades-old wood, paper backing, and insulation materials. The smoke detector in the hallway, the only one in the house, remained silent. Mark had removed its battery 3 weeks earlier when it started chirping at midnight, waking Emily. "I'll replace it tomorrow," he'd promised Sarah. But tomorrow became the next day, and then the next, until the dead smoke detector was forgotten. Entirely another item on a never-ending to-do list. Inside the wall, the small fire grew slowly, feeding on the dry wooden studs and paper-backed insulation. Smoke began to accumulate in the hollow space between walls, invisible to the sleeping family but detectable to more sensitive noses. At 2:43 a.m., the first wisps of smoke found their way out through an electrical outlet, curling into the living room air. Max had been dozing fitfully at the foot of Emily's bed, his favorite spot in the house. The little girl had snuck him upstairs, despite her father's rule that the dog should sleep in the kitchen. "He gets lonely, Daddy," she had explained with such earnestness that Sarah had convinced Mark to let it slide, just for tonight. The rescue dog's nose twitched first, even before his eyes opened. His head lifted suddenly, ears perked forward. Something was wrong. Something dangerous. He inhaled deeply, processing the information his keen senses detected. The acrid scent of burning plastic, the subtle odor of heated metal, and beneath it all, the unmistakable smell of smoke. Max stood up, his body tense, and moved to Emily's bedroom door. He sniffed at the crack beneath it, where the air from the hallway seeped in. The smell was stronger there. He looked back at the sleeping child, then to the door again, making a soft whine of indecision. Downstairs, the fire had begun to spread, more aggressively. The insulation inside the wall had caught fully now, providing steady fuel. The flames found a vertical path upward, following the wooden studs like a ladder. The fire's natural tendency to climb drew it toward the second floor, where the family slept unaware. The temperature inside the wall space was rising rapidly. At 300 degrees Fahrenheit, the drywall itself began to smolder. At 451 degrees, the wallpaper in the living room near the origin point started to brown and curl. At just after 3:02 a.m., the first visible flame licked out from behind the baseboard. Catching the edge of the living room curtains, Max was pacing now, moving from Emily's bed to the door and back again. The smell of smoke had grown stronger, and his instincts screamed danger. He nudged Emily's hand with his nose, but the exhausted child only turned over, pulling her stuffed unicorn closer. The dog's anxiety increased as he detected another worrying change. The level of carbon monoxide in the house was rising. Colorless and odorless to humans, this deadly gas was another danger Max could sense, but couldn't communicate. He knew only that the air was becoming dangerous to breathe, especially for the small humans he had come to protect. Downstairs, the curtains were fully ablaze now, the flames spreading to the nearby bookshelf. The heat was intensifying, creating a convection current that pulled fresh oxygen in through the gaps around doors and windows while pushing toxic smoke upward through the house. The first tendril of visible smoke crept under Emily's door at 3:12 a.m. Max barked once, sharply, but the sound was absorbed by the carpeting and stuffed animals that filled the little girl's room. In the master bedroom down the hall, Sarah stirred briefly before drifting back to sleep, attributing the distant bark to a neighborhood dog or perhaps a dream. The fire was feeding on the abundant fuel of the living room now. Books, photo albums, the fabric of the couch, the synthetic carpet. Each material added its own toxic component to the smoke that was filling the home. The living room ceiling had reached nearly 1,000 degrees, causing the paint to blister and crack. At 3:17 a.m., exactly 1 hour after the first spark, the large front window of the living room shattered from thermal stress, allowing a rush of fresh oxygen to enter. The fire responded with explosive growth, a phenomenon firefighters call flashover, the point at which everything in a room reaches ignition temperature simultaneously. The roar of the flashover penetrated even the closed doors upstairs. Max's barking became frantic now, his paws scratching at Emily's door. The little girl sat up groggily, rubbing her eyes. "Max, what's wrong?" But before she could fully wake, the dog heard another sound that chilled his blood, the cracking of wood as the fire began to consume the staircase, their primary escape route. In the master bedroom, Sarah finally woke to the smell of smoke. "Mark," she whispered, shaking her husband's shoulder. "Mark, wake up. I think I smell smoke." Mark Johnson opened his eyes reluctantly, about to dismiss his wife's concerns, when he too caught the unmistakable acrid scent. He sat up suddenly, fully alert now. "That's not just smoke," he said, his voice tight with fear. "That's a fire." In Emily's room, the little girl had noticed the smoke seeping under her door. "Max?" Her voice trembled as she clutched her stuffed unicorn tighter. "I'm scared." The rescue dog stood between the child and the door, his posture rigid, his hackles raised as he faced the growing threat on the other side. The smoke alarm that might have given the family precious minutes of warning remained silent. It's dead. Battery, a mute testament to good intentions unfulfilled. Outside the bedroom doors, the hallway was filling with smoke, and the sound of crackling flames grew louder as the fire climbed the staircase, blocking the family's primary escape route. The silent killer had found its voice, and now it was roaring. Let's go back to when the fire first began to spread, before the family found themselves trapped in the bathroom. It was Emily, the youngest Johnson at just 5 years old, who had first understood Max's desperate warnings. A connection formed through the pure, unquestioning love that often exists between a child and their pet. Earlier that night, when the first wisps of smoke had begun to seep under her door, Emily had been lost in dreams of unicorns and rainbows. Max, sensing the danger before anyone else, had tried the gentle approach first, nudging her small hand with his cold, wet nose. When that failed, he'd progressed to quiet whimpers, then to more insistent barking. But Emily, exhausted from a day of kindergarten and playground adventures, had only pulled her stuffed unicorn closer and burrowed deeper under her pink comforter. Max had paced anxiously beside her bed, his nails clicking on the hardwood floor not covered by her princess. Rug, the smoke was getting thicker, the danger more imminent. He needed to wake her now. With a soft whine of apology, Max had gently taken Emily's pajama sleeve between his teeth and tugged. When she still didn't stir, he'd done something he'd never done before, something that went against all his training and gentle nature. He'd nipped at her arm, not hard enough to break the skin, but with enough pressure to cause a sharp, surprising sensation. Emily's eyes had flown open, a small cry of surprise escaping her lips. "Max, you bit me!" Her voice had held more confusion than accusation, unable to comprehend why her beloved dog would do such a thing. Max had immediately backed away, ears flattened in contrition, but his eyes remained fixed on hers with an intensity that stopped her protests. Then he'd barked once, sharply, and moved to the door, looking back at her expectantly. It was then that Emily had noticed the strange gray haze filling her room, the odd acrid smell that made her throat tickle. "Smoke?" she'd whispered, her young mind trying to process what was happening. Max had barked again, pawing at the door, his meaning clear even to a 5-year-old. "We need to get out." Emily had slipped from her bed, clutching her unicorn tightly against her chest. "Is there a fire, Max?" she'd asked, her voice small and frightened. The dog had whined in response, continuing to scratch at the door with increasing urgency. Unlike her parents and brothers, who might have questioned or hesitated, Emily had trusted Max completely. "Okay," she'd said simply, reaching for the doorknob. "Let's go." When she'd opened the door, the thicker smoke in the hallway had made her gasp and cough. Max had immediately positioned himself against her legs, physically pushing her toward her parents' bedroom while staying between her and the direction of the heaviest smoke. "Mommy! Daddy!" Emily had called out, her voice thin and scared as she shuffled forward, one hand on Max's back for guidance and comfort. When they'd reached the master bedroom, Max had resumed his frantic barking, scratching at the door until Mark had yanked it open, irritation turning to horror as he had seen the smoke and his frightened daughter. "Fire!" Emily had managed between coughs. "Max woke me up." Sarah had sprung from the bed, maternal instinct overriding fear as she'd swept Emily into her arms. "The boys!" she'd gasped to Mark. "Get the boys!" But Max was already racing toward the boys' rooms, his mission only half complete. Now, trapped in the bathroom with the fire raging outside, Emily huddled against her mother, her unicorn clutched. In a death grip, her eyes wide with terror, but also absolute faith in the dog who had saved her. "Max will help us," she said, with the unshakable confidence of a child. "He's a hero dog." Sarah smoothed Emily's tangled blonde hair, fighting to keep her own voice steady. Yes, honey. Max is very brave. The bathroom was growing hotter by the calm minute. The towels stuffed under the door were beginning to smolder, and the mirror had cracked from the heat. Outside the small window they could hear voices, but no rescuers had appeared yet. We need to stay low, Mark instructed, pulling everyone down to sit on the bathroom floor where the air was slightly clearer. Cover your mouths with the wet towels. Michael, the oldest at 12, was trying to be brave, but his voice shook as he asked, "Are we going to die?" Before his parents could answer, Emily spoke up with absolute certainty. "No, silly. Max won't let us die." As if responding to her faith, Max suddenly stood alert, ears forward, listening intently. Then he began to bark in a new pattern. 3 sharp barks, a pause, then 3 more. "What's he doing?" Jake asked, wiping tears from his smoke-reddened eyes. "It sounds like—" "He's signaling," Michael realized, "like in those old rescue dog movies." Outside they heard a shout. "They're in the bathroom. I can hear a dog barking." Mark leaned out the small window again. "We're here? Family of 5 and a dog. The door is blocked by fire. Hang tight," came the response. "Fire department's 2 minutes out. Is there any other way to access that bathroom?" Mark thought quickly. "There's a linen closet that backs up to this bathroom wall. From the hallway, second door on the left." Max continued his rhythmic barking, somehow understanding the need to guide rescuers to their location. The bathroom was now sweltering, the air growing more toxic despite the small window. Jake had begun to cough violently, and Michael was becoming disoriented. "I can't breathe," he gasped, slumping against the bathtub. Sarah pressed a fresh wet towel to his face. "Just a little longer, sweetheart. Help is coming." Emily, surprisingly calm despite the chaos, sat with one arm around Max's neck. "It's okay," she whispered to the dog. "You did good. The firefighters are coming now." Max licked her cheek once, then returned to his sentinel position by the door, where he could monitor the encroaching threat. His fur was singed in spots, and his eyes were watering from the smoke, but his focus never wavered. Through the window, they heard the blessed sound of sirens growing louder, then the shouts of firefighters as they arrived on scene. Flashlight beams cut through the smoke outside, voices called out instructions, and the mechanical roar of equipment being deployed gave them renewed hope. "Johnson family," a voice called through the window. "We're coming for you. Stay low and keep those towels over your faces." Mark cradled Jake, who had begun to lose consciousness. Sarah held Michael and Emily, her arms barely able to encompass both children, and Max, their unlikely guardian, stood vigilant, his body tense as they heard the sounds of firefighters battling through the inferno to reach them. A tremendous cracking sound made them all jump. The bathroom door was starting to give way as the fire ate through the wood. Max growled low in his throat, positioning himself between the door and the family, a last line of defense against the approaching flames. "Hurry!" Mark shouted through the window, real panic edging into his voice for the first time. "The doors breaking through." The next sound they heard was the most beautiful of their lives, the crash of an axe breaking through the wall from the linen closet side, followed by a firefighter's voice. "We're coming through. Get back from the wall." Max's instincts took over as the smoke thickened under Emily's door. With one last glance at the frightened child, he made a decision. He needed to alert the parents. They were the pack leaders, the ones who could help everyone escape. "Stay here," he seemed to command with his eyes, before scratching frantically at the door until Emily opened it just enough for him to squeeze through. The hallway was already filling with smoke, forcing Max to stay low as he raced to the master bedroom. The door was closed, but unlike Emily's room, a wider gap at the bottom allowed him to thrust his nose underneath, whining loudly. When no one responded, Max barked sharply, once, twice, 3 times. He heard movement inside, but not the quick, urgent kind he needed. They weren't understanding the danger. Inside the master bedroom, Mark groggily swatted at the air. "It's just that damn dog again," he muttered. "I knew we shouldn't have let Emily keep him upstairs." Sarah sat up beside him, more alert. "He sounds different, Mark. Something's wrong." Before Mark could respond, Max started scratching violently at their door, his claws leaving deep gouges in the wood. "That's it," Mark said, throwing back the covers. "That dog is going back to the shelter tomorrow. I'm not having our house destroyed." Because the words died in his throat as he opened the door and a wall of smoke billowed into the room. Max darted between his legs, barking and circling, then running back to the door. "Oh my God," Sarah gasped, suddenly fully awake. "The house is on fire. The kids, Mark, we need to get the kids." Max barked again, more urgently, before racing back into the smoke-filled hallway. He needed to check on the other children. Michael's room was furthest from the stairs, a blessing that had given him more time before the smoke reached him. The 12-year-old was still sound asleep, oblivious to the danger closing in around their home. Max jumped onto Michael's bed, barking directly into his ear, but the boy merely rolled over, pulling his pillow over his head. "Go away, Max," he mumbled. The dog tried again, this time tugging at the blanket, pulling it completely off the bed. Michael's only response was to curl into a tighter ball, clinging to the last vestiges of sleep. Time was running out. Max could hear the fire crackling downstairs, growing louder as it consumed the wooden staircase. He had to try another approach. Reluctantly leaving Michael, Max raced to Jake's room across the hall. The 8-year-old was a lighter sleeper, more likely to respond. Jake's door was slightly ajar, and Max pushed through easily. The boy was stirring already, coughing lightly as the first wisps of smoke entered his room. Max leapt onto the bed, barking and licking Jake's face insistently. "Oh, Max, stop it!" Jake complained, pushing at the dog. Then his eyes widened as he noticed the smoke. "What's happening, Max?" The dog barked once, then moved to the door, looking back expectantly. Jake hesitated only a moment before following, clutching his favorite action figure. As they stepped into the hallway, Jake gasped at the thickening smoke. "Mom, Dad!" he called out, fear making his voice crack. From the master bedroom, Sarah appeared, a wet towel pressed to her face. "Jake, thank God! Where are your brother and sister?" Before Jake could answer, Max was already racing back toward Michael's room, barking continuously now, trying to lead them. "Mark's gone to get Emily," Sarah said, grabbing Jake's hand. "Let's get Michael." They found Mark in the hallway, Emily in his arms, her face buried against his chest. "The stairs are on fire," he said, his voice tight with controlled panic. "We need another way out." "Michael's still in his room," Sarah responded, pulling Jake toward his brother's door. Inside, they found Michael finally awake, coughing and disoriented as he stumbled around his room. "Mom?" he called out, fear evident in his voice. "I'm here, honey," Sarah answered, rushing to his side. "We need to go now. The house is on fire." The family regrouped in the hallway, the smoke growing thicker by the second. Mark handed Emily to Sarah and took charge. "We need to get to the back staircase through the guest room," he said, referring to the narrow servants' stairs that were rarely used. As they started moving, Max suddenly darted ahead, then back, barking and circling, in obvious distress. "What's wrong with him?" Michael asked between coughs. They got their answer moments later as a thunderous crash echoed through the house. The main staircase had collapsed, sending a plume of sparks and smoke up the hallway. The noise was followed by the sound of breaking glass as windows shattered from the heat. "This way," Mark urged, guiding his family toward the guest room. But when he opened the door, thick black smoke poured out. The fire had somehow found its way there first, possibly through the heating vents. Max barked frantically, running to the bathroom door instead, scratching and whining. "He wants us to go that way," Emily said, pointing. Mark hesitated. The bathroom was a dead end. No windows large enough to escape from. No secondary exit. "It would trap them. There's no way out through there," he said, looking desperately for another option as the heat intensified around them. Max continued barking, more insistent now, running between them and the bathroom door. "Trust him," Emily pleaded, coughing. "Please, Daddy." With the fire closing in from both ends of the hallway and no other options, Mark made a decision. "Okay, everyone in the bathroom, now." The family rushed inside and Mark slammed the door behind them, stuffing towels along the bottom to block the smoke. It was a temporary haven at best, but they were trapped with no visible escape route. "Now what?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. As she held Emily and Jake close, Max wasn't finished. The dog moved to the small frosted window, high on the bathroom wall, the one they all assumed was too small for escape, and stood on his hind legs, pawing at it desperately. "He wants us." "To open the window," Michael said. Mark reached up and unlatched it, pushing the small window outward. Fresh air rushed in, bringing momentary relief from the smoke. Outside, they could see the orange glow of flames reflecting on their neighbor's house, hear distant sirens wailing. "Help!" Mark called through the window. "We're trapped! Help us!" But even as he shouted, he knew the window was far too small for any of them to fit through, except perhaps Emily. And it was a dangerous 8-foot drop to the ground below. Inside the bathroom, the temperature was rising. They could feel the heat radiating through the door as the fire raged in the hallway outside. Water from the shower helped dampen more towels to cover their mouths, but they were running out of time and options. Max continued to bark at the window, then suddenly stopped, his ears perking up, as if listening. A moment later, they all heard it, voices outside, shouting back, "We're coming! Hang on!" For the first time since waking to the nightmare, a glimmer of hope appeared. But the question remained, how would they get out before the fire reached them? The axe crashed through the drywall again, widening the hole with each powerful swing. Plaster dust mingled with the smoke as a section of wall finally gave way. A firefighter in full gear pushed through the opening, the beam of his helmet light cutting through the smoky darkness. "I've got them," he called over his shoulder, before turning to the family. "Everyone okay? Anyone injured?" "My boys," Sarah cried, gesturing to Michael and Jake, who were both now barely conscious. "They've inhaled a lot of smoke." "Let's get you all out of here," the firefighter said, his voice steady and reassuring despite the urgency of the situation. "We'll go through the wall. It's the safest route." Another firefighter appeared at the hole, passing through oxygen masks. "Put these on the kids first," he instructed. Mark fitted a mask over Jake's face, while Sarah did the same for Michael. Emily, still remarkably alert, allowed the firefighter to place one over her nose and mouth without protest. "What about Max?" she asked, her voice muffled behind the plastic. "The dog?" the firefighter confirmed, looking at the vigilant canine still standing guard. "We'll get him out too, sweetheart. Promise." The bathroom door was beginning to glow red-hot around the edges, the towels at its base now fully aflame. They had minutes, perhaps seconds, before it gave way entirely. "Time to move," the first firefighter said. "I'll take the boys. Johnson, you help your wife through." Then, the little girl. "Max goes first," Emily insisted, clutching her unicorn with one hand and the dog's singed fur with the other. The firefighters exchanged glances, then nodded. "Okay, dog first. He's been brave enough to earn it." Mark lifted Max toward the hole, but the dog squirmed and resisted, turning back to look at Emily with anxious eyes. "It's okay, Max," she reassured him. "I'm coming too. You go first and make sure it's safe." At her words, Max allowed himself to be passed through the opening to the waiting arms of a third firefighter in the linen closet. The boys went next, Michael first, then Jake, both limp and worryingly still as they were carefully maneuvered through the hole. Sarah followed, her movements clumsy with fear and exhaustion. Just as Mark was lifting Emily toward the opening, a deafening crack split the air. The bathroom door had given way, unleashing a torrent of flames and superheated air into the small space. "Go!" shouted the firefighter, pushing Mark and Emily toward the hole with one hand while raising his other arm to shield them from the blast of heat. Mark thrust Emily through the opening into her mother's waiting arms, then dove through himself. As the firefighter followed, his turnout gear smoking from the intensity of the flames, in the relative safety of the linen closet, they found another firefighter waiting with a hose, spraying water to hold back the fire that was already pushing through the hole they'd just escaped through. "Move, move, move!" shouted the incident commander at the end of the hallway. "This way!" The family was quickly ushered away from the spreading fire, each child carried by a firefighter, while Mark supported Sarah, who was beginning to show signs of smoke inhalation herself. Max trotted alongside Emily's carrier, refusing to be separated from her again. The journey through the burning house was a surreal nightmare of orange flames, black smoke, and the hiss of water turning instantly to steam as firefighters battled the blaze around them. The heat was oppressive, the noise overwhelming, cracking wood, shattering glass, the roar of the fire itself, seeming almost alive, hungry and angry at being cheated of its prey. "Almost there," called the firefighter carrying Emily. "Front. Doors just ahead." But as they approached the main entrance, a thunderous crash echoed through the house. Part of the second-floor landing had collapsed, blocking their escape route with burning debris. "Back! Everyone back!" the commander shouted. "West side exit through the kitchen." They reversed direction, moving deeper into the burning structure, before turning toward what had once been a cheerful family kitchen. The refrigerator was now a melted hulk, the cabinets actively burning, and the linoleum floor bubbling from the heat. "Stay close," ordered the commander, leading them toward a door that opened onto the back porch. "Watch for falling debris." As if triggered by his warning, a flaming ceiling beam crashed down just feet from where they stood. Max barked sharply, lunging forward to push Emily's firefighter carrier a step further from danger. "Good dog," the firefighter gasped, nodding thanks to Max as they continued their retreat. Finally, they reached the back door. The commander kicked it open, and cool night air rushed in, a blessed relief after the inferno inside. One by one, they stumbled out onto the porch and down the steps to the relative safety of the backyard. Neighbors had gathered in the alley behind the house, many in bathrobes and slippers, watching in horror as the Johnson home was consumed by flames. A cheer went up as they emerged from the burning building. "We need paramedics here now," shouted the commander as the firefighters gently laid the children on the grass. EMTs rushed forward with oxygen tanks and medical kits. Michael and Jake were quickly fitted with non-rebreather masks, their vital signs checked by efficient hands. Emily, though coughing, remained conscious and alert, her eyes never leaving Max as the dog stood guard beside her makeshift treatment area. "Her oxygen stats are better than the others," remarked an EMT, checking the monitor clipped to Emily's finger. "It's like she got out sooner or was exposed to less smoke." "The dog woke her first," Sarah explained between coughs as she received oxygen herself. Before any of us knew what was happening, the EMT looked at Max with newfound respect. "Good boy," he said simply. More fire trucks arrived, more hoses deployed, but it was already clear that the house could not be saved. The structure was fully involved now, flames shooting 30 feet into the night sky, illuminating the neighborhood with an eerie, flickering orange glow. Mark stood with his arm around Sarah, both watching their home burn with shell-shocked expressions. "Everything we have," he whispered, "everything we've built." "We have the kids," Sarah reminded him, squeezing his hand. "We have each other. That's what matters." As if understanding the gravity of the moment, Max moved from Emily's side to stand between Mark and Sarah, leaning gently against their legs in silent support. Mark looked down at the dog he'd been ready to return to the shelter just hours earlier. The animal's fur was singed in patches, his eyes red from the smoke, his breathing labored. Yet he'd shown more courage than Mark had thought possible. Kneeling down, Mark took the dog's face between his hands, looking directly into those intelligent eyes. "You saved my family," he said, his voice breaking. "You saved all of us." Max licked his face once, then turned back toward Emily, who was being prepped for transport to the hospital. "Sir, ma'am," a paramedic approached them. "We need to take your children to the hospital for treatment. Standard procedure for smoke. Inhalation, you should get checked out too." Sarah nodded. "What about Max? He needs a vet. He breathed in the same smoke we did." The paramedic hesitated. "Technically, we're not supposed to transport animals." "He comes with us," Mark said, in a tone that brooked no argument. "That dog is family." The emergency room at Mercy General Hospital was a flurry of activity as the Johnson family arrived. Michael and Jake were immediately whisked away to trauma rooms, their conditions the most serious. Emily, though shaken and smoky, remained surprisingly stable. Max had refused to leave her side, growling softly whenever hospital staff attempted to separate them. "I'm sorry, but dogs aren't allowed in the treatment areas," a nurse explained apologetically. "It's hospital policy." "This isn't just any dog," Mark argued, his voice hoarse from smoke. "He saved our lives tonight. My daughter won't let him out of her sight." The nurse hesitated, looking at Emily's small hand buried in Max's fur, the little girl's eyes wide with residual fear. "Let me check with the attending physician," she said finally. Dr. Patel, the emergency room physician, arrived moments later. He quickly assessed the situation, his experienced eyes taking in the traumatized family and the protective dog. "The dog stays," he decided, surprising everyone. "I've seen therapy dogs do wonders for patients in shock. Consider this: emergency, therapy." He smiled kindly at Emily. "Just keep him on the floor when we're examining you, okay?" Emily nodded solemnly, her unicorn clutched in one arm, while her other hand remained firmly on Max's head. As the medical team worked to assess and treat the family, Detective Rivera from the Fire Investigation Unit arrived to take preliminary statements. "I know this is difficult," she said gently, "but it helps us determine the cause while everything is still fresh." Mark nodded, watching through the glass partition as nurses worked on his sons. "It was electrical," he said flatly. "Had to be. The signs were there for months, flickering lights, breakers tripping. I kept putting off getting it fixed." His voice broke. "This is my fault." Detective Rivera shook her head. "House fires happen for many reasons, Mr. Johnson. Don't blame yourself until we have the facts." Sarah, who had been receiving oxygen therapy, removed her mask to speak. "Max knew," she said. "He was acting strange all day, especially near the living room wall where—" She trailed off, the reality of losing their home still too raw. "The dog was warning you," Detective Rivera noted, looking at Max with interest. "That's not uncommon. Animals can sense things we can't. Changes in air quality, ultrasonic sounds from arcing wires. Their senses are far more acute than ours." Nurse approached with update on the boys. "Michael is responding well to the oxygen therapy. Jake had a more severe case of smoke inhalation, but his vitals are stabilizing. We'd like to admit all 3 children overnight for observation, which is standard protocol." "And my wife?" Mark asked. "Mrs. Johnson should also stay for monitoring," the nurse advised. "You too, sir, though your exposure seems less severe." Mark nodded, relief washing over him. They would recover. Thanks to Max, they had escaped with their lives. "What about Max?" Emily piped up, her small voice anxious. "He breathed the bad air too." Dr. Patel smiled at her concern. "I've called a friend who's a veterinarian. She's coming in specially to check on your brave dog." Emily's face brightened. "Thank you," she said with the solemn gravity only a 5-year-old can muster. While they waited for rooms to be prepared, Detective Rivera continued her gentle questioning, trying to reconstruct the events of the night. "You mentioned the dog. Woke Emily first?" she asked. Sarah nodded. "Max always slept in her room, even though we tried to keep him downstairs at first. Emily would sneak him up." A small smile crossed her tired face. "I guess we should be grateful for her stubbornness." "He bit me," Emily announced suddenly, holding out her arm where a small red mark was visible. "But not a bad bite, just to—" "Wake me up." Detective Rivera leaned in to examine the mark. "That's what we call a control bite," she explained. "Police dogs are trained to do that. Apply just enough pressure to get attention without causing real harm. It shows incredible restraint and intelligence." "Where did Max come from?" she asked, looking at the mixed-breed dog with newfound respect. Mark shrugged. "The shelter. We've only had him 3 weeks. He was scheduled to be—" He couldn't finish the sentence, the word euthanized sticking in his throat. "The lady said nobody wanted him because he was too jumpy and barked too much," Emily added, "but I loved him right away." Dr. Chen, the veterinarian, arrived then, carrying a medical bag. She knelt beside Max, speaking soothingly as she examined him. Mild smoke inhalation, she diagnosed after a thorough check. Some minor burns on his paws and muzzle, nothing that won't heal. She looked up at the family. He's one tough cookie. Will he need to stay at the animal hospital? Sarah asked anxiously. Dr. Chen shook her head. I don't think that's necessary. I can administer some treatments here and provide medication. Honestly, separating him from this little one might cause more stress than the physical issues. She smiled at Emily. Just then, a hospital administrator appeared, looking harried. I've been informed there's a dog in the ER, she began sternly. Before anyone could respond, Dr. Patel stepped forward. This is a certified therapy dog, he said smoothly, with a quick wink at Emily. Essential for the psychological well-being of these patients who've experienced severe trauma. The administrator frowned skeptically. I don't recall approving he saved their lives, Detective Rivera interrupted, flashing her badge, and I'm considering him material evidence in an ongoing investigation. He stays. Faced with both medical and law enforcement authority, the IDOF's administrator retreated, muttering about insurance regulations. Thank you, Mark said sincerely to both the doctor and detective. Dr. Patel shrugged. Rules exist for good reasons, but sometimes compassion has to take precedence. Now let's get your family settled into rooms. I believe we can arrange to keep you all together in our pediatric wing. As hospital staff prepared to move them upstairs, Red Cross volunteers arrived with comfort kits, toiletries, clean clothes, and other essentials for the family who had lost everything. We've arranged temporary housing for you at the Comfort Inn once you're discharged, a volunteer explained, and we'll help connect you with longer-term resources in the coming days. The reality of their situation was beginning to sink in. No home, no possessions, no photographs or mementos, nothing but the smoke-scented clothes on their backs and each other. Emily seemed to sense her parents' despair. It's okay, she said, patting her mother's hand. We still have Max and Max. We'll take care of us. Sarah pulled her daughter close, tears finally spilling over. Yes, sweetie, we have Max. As the family was wheeled toward the elevators, Max trotted alongside Emily's gurney, his posture alert and protective despite his own injuries. The dog who had been unwanted, scheduled for euthanasia just 3 weeks earlier, had become their guardian, their hero, their salvation. In the pediatric wing, the staff had prepared a family suite, an arrangement usually reserved for end-of-life situations but made available due to the extraordinary circumstances. 3 beds for the children, 2 recliners for the parents, and a blanket on the floor for Max. Get some rest, Dr. Patel advised as he checked the oxygen levels for each child one last time. Your bodies need to recover. As the door closed behind, the medical team, the Johnson family, found themselves alone together for the first time since the fire. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind bone-deep exhaustion and the first real opportunity to process what they had survived. I can't believe it's all gone, Michael whispered, his voice small and lost. Not everything, Mark answered, looking around at his family, smoky, bandaged, exhausted, but alive. The most important things are right here in this room. Max, who had been circling the perimeter of the room in one final security check, finally settled on the blanket between the children's beds with a deep sigh. His job for now was done. Morning came with the gentle bustle of a hospital shift change. The Johnson family had slept fitfully, waking to the beeping of monitors and the regular checks by night staff. Max had maintained his vigil, dozing lightly but alert to every sound. Every movement in the hallway outside their room. Dr. Patel arrived early, accompanied by a pediatric pulmonologist. Good morning, he greeted them, his voice upbeat despite the shadows under his eyes, suggesting he hadn't left the hospital. I've asked Dr. Winters to consult on the children's cases. Dr. Winters, a gray-haired woman with kind eyes, moved from bed to bed, checking each child's oxygen levels and listening to their lungs with practiced efficiency. Michael and Emily are doing remarkably well, she announced. Jake is still showing some respiratory distress, but it's improving. She turned to Mark and Sarah. We'd like to keep Jake another day for observation, but I believe Michael and Emily could be discharged this afternoon. Sarah glanced anxiously at Jake, whose sleep had been punctuated by coughing fits throughout the night. We won't leave without him. Of course not, Dr. Patel assured her. We can arrange for you to stay here with Jake while he recovers. A nurse appeared with breakfast trays, the hospital's attempt at cheerful morning nutrition. Oatmeal with brown sugar, apple juice, and toast cut into triangles for the children. As they picked at their food, a new visitor arrived. Tom Henderson, their next-door neighbor, looking haggard and upset. I came as soon as I heard you were receiving visitors, he said, twisting his baseball cap in his hands. It's just awful. The whole neighborhood is in shock. How bad is it, Marky asked, dreading the answer, but needing to know. Tom hesitated, glancing at the children. Maybe we should step outside. It's okay, Sarah said quietly. They need to understand what's happened. Tom nodded reluctantly. There's nothing left, Mark. The structure collapsed around 4 a.m. The fire department is still monitoring for hot spots, but they're calling it a total loss. Emily's small voice broke the heavy silence that followed. What about Mr. Snuggles? Tom looked confused. Her stuffed bear, Sarah explained. The one she's had since she was a baby. She wasn't able to bring it. It was in her special toy chest. Tom's face fell further. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. The firefighters couldn't save anything. Emily's lower lip trembled, but she nodded bravely. At least we saved Max, she whispered, reaching down to stroke the dog's head. And Max saved us. Tom crouched down to eye level with Max, who regarded him warily. So, this is the hero dog everyone's talking about? Everyone? Mark asked. It's all over the local news, Tom confirmed. The Johnson's dog saves family from fire. The shelter where you got him has been fielding calls all morning. People want to know his story. As if on cue, Max's ears perked up at a sound in the hallway before anyone else heard it. Moments later, there was a knock at the door, and Melissa Chang from Channel 7 News poked her head in. I'm so sorry to intrude, she said. The nurse said it might be okay to speak with you briefly. The community is very moved by your story. Mark and Sarah exchanged glances, communicating silently, as parents often do. Sarah gave a small nod. You can come in, Mark said, but keep it brief. The kids need their rest. Melissa entered, followed by a cameraman who remained discreetly by the door. We won't air anything you're not comfortable with, she assured them. We just want to share this incredible story of survival and heroism. For the next 15 minutes, the Johnsons recounted the events of the previous night, the electrical fire, Max's desperate attempts to wake them, the harrowing escape through the bathroom wall. Max was the real hero, Michael said, speaking up for the first time that morning. I didn't even believe Dad when he said we needed a dog. I thought it was just more responsibility, you know? But Max, he's not just a pet, he saved our lives. The sincerity in the 12-year-old's voice brought tears to Sarah's eyes. Michael had been the most resistant to adopting Max, arguing that the mixed-breed rescue dog was weird-looking and probably had issues. Where did Max come from? Melissa asked. Was he trained as a service dog? Second Chance Animal Shelter, Sarah replied. He was scheduled to be euthanized the day we adopted him. They told us he'd been returned twice because he was too anxious, too vocal. She smiled ruefully. Turns out, those were exactly the qualities that saved us. Max, who had been lying quietly during the interview, suddenly stood up, ears alert. A moment later, Jake began coughing violently, his oxygen levels dropping on the monitor beside his bed. We need some help in here. Mark called, reaching for the nurse call button. The medical team responded immediately, rushing in to adjust Jake's oxygen and administer a breathing treatment. Melissa and her cameraman quickly retreated, recognizing that the interview was over. How? Did the dog know? Dr. Winters marveled once Jake was stabilized. He alerted before the monitors did. He just knows things, Emily said simply, as if it were the most obvious fact in the world. By afternoon, the hospital room had begun to fill with flowers, cards, and gifts from well-wishers who had seen the morning news segment. A local pet store had delivered a large basket of premium dog food, treats, and toys for Max. A children's bookstore sent new books for each child, including one about rescue dogs for Emily. The most surprising delivery came from Second Chance Animal Shelter, a large envelope containing Max's original intake paperwork and what little they knew of his history. "I thought you might want this," Diane Porter, the shelter director, said as she handed the envelope to Sarah. "Max's story before he came to you." Sarah opened it with trembling hands, spreading the documents on Jake's bed where the whole family could see. "He was found as a stray," she read aloud, "approximately 3 years old, no microchip, no collar." She turned the page. First adopted by the Mitchell family, returned after 2 weeks for excessive barking and destructive behavior. "Sounds familiar," Mark said with a small smile, remembering his own frustration with Max's barking and how close he'd come to returning the dog himself. "Second adoption by the Garcias," Sarah continued, "returned after 1 month. Notes indicate he kept trying to escape and would howl when left alone." There was a photo clipped to the paperwork. Max, when he'd first arrived at the shelter, thinner and more fearful looking, but with the same intelligent eyes. "Maybe he wasn't trying to escape," Michael suggested thoughtfully. "Maybe he was trying to find us." The simple statement hung in the air, powerful in its childlike wisdom and faith. Dr. Patel returned with afternoon rounds, pleased to report that both Michael and Emily were cleared for discharge. "Jake is doing much better, but I'd like to keep him until tomorrow morning as a precaution." "We'll all stay," Mark decided. "We're not splitting up the family." Dr. Patel nodded understanding. "I thought you might say that. We'll have cots brought in." As he turned to leave, he paused. "Oh, and the hospital administration asked me to inform you that Max has been officially registered as a therapy dog in our system." He winked at Emily, "just in case anyone else questions his presence." "Thank you," Sarah said sincerely, "for everything." After he left, the family sat in comfortable silence, processing all that had happened. Their home was gone, yes, but something new had been forged in the flames of that terrible night, a deeper understanding of what truly mattered, and an unbreakable bond with the once unwanted dog who had become their guardian and savior. 2 days after the fire, the Johnson family stood in the parking lot of the Comfort Inn where the Red Cross had arranged temporary housing for them. Jake had been discharged that morning, his lungs finally clear enough to leave medical supervision. The family had nothing but donated clothes, toiletries, and Max, who hadn't left Emily's side since the fire. "Home sweet home," Mark said with forced cheerfulness, unlocking the door to their 2 adjoining rooms, at least for the next week. The accommodations were clean and comfortable, but sterile and impersonal, a far cry from the warm, lived-in home they had lost. 2 queen beds in each room, a small desk, identical abstract artwork on the walls. Nothing that spoke of them, of who they were as a family. "Where will Max sleep?" Emily asked, still clutching the unicorn she'd carried from the fire, now washed, but still smelling faintly of smoke. "Wherever he wants," Mark answered without hesitation. "Hotel rules don't apply to hero dogs." This small concession brought a smile to Emily's face. She patted the bed nearest the window. "You can sleep here with me, Max." The dog hopped up immediately, turning in 3 circles before settling at the foot of the bed as if he'd always belonged there. "First things first," Sarah said, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy. "We need to make a list of immediate necessities, school supplies for the kids, work clothes for Mark, and dog food for Max," Jake added. His voice was still raspy from smoke inhalation, but his spirit was recovering more quickly than anyone had expected. There was a knock at the door. Tom Henderson stood there with his wife Marjorie, arms full of shopping bags. "We thought you could use some essentials," Marjorie explained, setting the bags on the nearest bed. "Clothes for everyone, some basic school supplies, toiletries, just to tide you over." The whole neighborhood took up a collection, Tom added. It's not much, but it's everything, Sarah said, her voice breaking as she hugged them both. Thank you. As they unpacked the gifts, another knock came. This time, Diane Porter from the animal shelter, carrying a large basket. For Max, she said, setting down a collection of premium dog food, new bowls, a plush bed, and several toys. The least we could do for our most famous alumnus. Famous? Michael asked. Diane smiled. The story's gone national. Rescue Dog returns the favor, they're calling it. We've had over 50 adoption inquiries for our long-term residents since yesterday. People are saying, if Max is so special, maybe the other overlooked dogs are too. He is special, Emily said solemnly, her arm around the dog's neck. Yes, he is, Diane agreed, and thanks to him, other dogs like him are getting second chances too. Throughout the afternoon, visitors continued to arrive, the children's teachers bringing cards made by classmates, Mark's co-workers with gift cards to department stores, neighbors with home-cooked meals. I had no idea so many people cared, Mark said quietly to Sarah as they watched the children sort through their new belongings. It takes a crisis sometimes, she replied, to show us we're not alone. By evening, the hotel rooms looked less barren, personalized with the gifts and small touches from friends and well-wishers. The children were settled in front of the television, watching a movie about, appropriately enough, a heroic dog. Mom, Dad, Michael called suddenly, Max is on TV. They turned to see Melissa Chang's news segment airing on the local station. The story had indeed gone national, with footage of Max in the hospital, alert and protective beside Emily's bed. The Johnson family lost everything in the electrical fire, Melissa's voice narrated over images of their charred home. Everything except what matters most. Each other, thanks to an unwanted shelter dog named Max. The segment included interviews with firefighters who had responded to the blaze. In my 20 years of service, said Fire Captain Rodriguez, I've never seen such a clear-cut case of an animal saving human lives. Without that dog's warning, we would have been recovering bodies, not rescuing survivors. Emily crawled onto Sarah's lap as they watched, seeking comfort from the reminder of that terrible night. Why did Max pick us? She asked. At the shelter, I mean. Sarah considered this. I think maybe you picked each other, sweetie. A match. Made in heaven, Mark added, scratching Max behind the ears. The dog's tail thumped contentedly against the hotel carpet. The news segment concluded with information about a GoFundMe page set up by neighbors to help the Johnsons rebuild. The amount, raised so far over $50,000 in just 2 days, left them speechless. People are so kind, Sarah whispered, overwhelmed by the generosity of friends and strangers alike. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Mark and Sarah sat on the small balcony outside their room. Max had positioned himself where he could see both the sleeping children through the glass door and the adults on the balcony, ever vigilant even in these safe surroundings. Insurance called, Mark said quietly. The initial assessment confirms what we already knew, total loss. They'll cover rebuilding, but... He trailed off. But it won't be the same house, Sarah finished for him. Not the home where we brought Michael home from the hospital, where Emily took her first steps. No, Mark agreed. But maybe that's okay. Maybe we build something new, something better. With proper wiring, Sarah added with a small smile. And state-of-the-art smoke detectors, Mark nodded, and a special place for Max. They fell silent, watching the stars emerge in the evening sky. The weight of what they'd lost balanced against the miracle of what they'd kept. I almost returned him, Mark confessed after a while. The day before the fire, I'd made up my mind he was too much trouble. The barking, the anxiety, the destroyed shoes. I know, Sarah said softly. I could see it in your face when you came home that night. If I had... He couldn't finish the thought, the alternative, too terrible to voice. Sarah took his hand. But you didn't. You gave him one more chance, and he gave us a second chance at life. Inside the room, Emily stirred in her sleep, reaching unconsciously for Max. The dog immediately moved closer, allowing her small hand to rest on his back. Her breathing eased, and she settled back into peaceful slumber. The insurance adjuster asked if we wanted to rebuild on the same lot or relocate, Mark continued. What do you think? Sarah considered the question. The children's schools they're our friends, our neighborhood that's rallied around us so beautifully. I think we stay, we rebuild, we show them and ourselves that we can rise from the ashes. Mark nodded, his decision made. Tomorrow, I'll call the contractor. We'll design something together, all of us, including Max. A forever home, Sarah said, for our forever family. Inside, Max's ears twitched at the sound of their voices. Though he couldn't understand their words, he sensed their resolve, their growing peace. His family was safe. Different, changed by fire and fear, but safe. And he would make sure they stayed that way, this strange pack that had taken him in when no one else would, that had given him purpose and belonging. For now, he would rest, pressed against the small human who had first loved him. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new spaces to learn and protect. But Max was ready. This was his family now, and he would never let them down. 1 week after the fire, the Johnsons were allowed to visit what remained of their home. The insurance company needed them to identify any salvageable items, though the fire inspector had warned them not to expect much. They stood on the sidewalk, a family frozen in place, staring at the charred skeleton of what had once been their haven. The roof had collapsed entirely, the walls were blackened husks, and yellow caution tape surrounded the perimeter. The smell of smoke still hung in the air, a pungent reminder of their narrow escape. It's so much worse than I imagined, Sarah whispered, clutching Mark's arm. Michael stood tall, trying to be brave for his siblings, but his lower lip trembled. Jake clung to his mother's side, wide-eyed and silent. Only Emily seemed somewhat composed, her small hand buried in Max's fur as always. Remember what matters, Mark said quietly. We all got out, thanks to Max. The fire inspector, a solemn man named Chief Ramirez, approached with clipboards and hard hats. If you're ready, we can do a brief walkthrough of the ground floor only. The second floor isn't structurally sound enough to risk it, Mark nodded. Kids, you stay here with Mom. Max and I will go with Chief Ramirez. No, Emily said firmly. Max stays with me. For once, Mark stood his ground. Honey, there could be sharp debris, exposed nails, things that could hurt his paws. He'll stay safe out here with you. Emily looked ready to protest, but then nodded, reluctantly. Okay, but be careful, Daddy. I will, Princess. He knelt to Max's level. You guard them, okay? I'll be right back. Max seemed to understand, settling into a sitting position beside Emily, his eyes alert and watchful. Mark followed Chief Ramirez through what had once been their front door, now just an opening in a charred wall. The interior was apocalyptic, blackened, beams, collapsed ceiling, furniture reduced to unrecognizable shapes. The water damage from the firefighters' hoses had turned everything into a soggy, sooty mess. The fire originated here, Chief Ramirez indicated what had been their living room wall. Just as you suspected, electrical failure in the wiring. The inspector found evidence of arc faults and wire degradation consistent with an older home that hadn't been rewired. Mark nodded, a lump in his throat as he pictured his family sleeping above this inferno. Is there anything salvageable, Chief? Ramirez hesitated. Sometimes we find things in unexpected places. Let's look around. They picked through the ruins methodically, Mark identifying what each blackened remnant had once been. The piano Sarah had inherited from her grandmother, the coffee table they'd bought on their honeymoon, the bookshelf filled with photo albums, and children's school projects, all gone. Outside, Emily was growing restless. What's taking Daddy so long? He needs to check everything carefully, Sarah explained, though she too was anxious about Mark being inside the unstable structure. Suddenly, Max's posture changed. His ears perked up, His body tensed, and a low growl rumbled in his throat. "What is it, boy?" Emily asked, following his gaze. A section of the remaining second floor, directly above where Mark and Chief Ramirez were examining what had been the dining room, was shifting. Small bits of debris began to rain down. "Mark!" Sarah screamed. "Get out! The ceiling!" Inside, Mark heard his wife's distant cry just as Chief Ramirez grabbed his arm. "We need to move, now!" the chief ordered, dragging Mark toward the door as a terrible groaning sound filled the air. They were 3 steps from the exit when the second floor gave way, crashing down in a thunderous avalanche of charred beams, drywall, and debris. The force of it knocked them both forward out of the house, but not before a falling beam struck Mark's leg with crushing force. "Daddy!" Emily screamed as dust and ash billowed out the doorway. Max reacted instantly, breaking free from Emily's grasp and bolting toward the house before anyone could stop him. "Max, no!" Sarah cried, holding the children back as Chief Ramirez radioed frantically for backup. The dust was so thick they could barely see, but the sounds told the story. Mark's pained groans, Max's determined barking, the continued settling of debris. Then, incredibly, Max emerged from the cloud of dust, pulling Mark by his jacket collar. The dog had somehow wedged himself under Mark's arm, becoming a living crutch that allowed the injured man to hop on his good leg. Chief Ramirez rushed forward to help, supporting Mark's other side as they moved away from the unstable structure. No sooner had they reached the safety of the sidewalk than another section of the house collapsed with a deafening roar. "Daddy!" The children surged forward as Mark was lowered carefully to the ground, his face contorted in pain. "I'm okay," he gasped unconvincingly. "Just my leg." Sarah knelt beside him, her face pale with fear. "We need an ambulance." "Already called," Chief Ramirez assured her, his own hands shaking slightly. "That was too close. If your dog hadn't—" They all looked at Max, who had resumed his protective position beside Emily, but kept his eyes fixed on Mark, as if assessing the severity of his injuries. The ambulance arrived within minutes, paramedics quickly stabilizing Mark's leg and loading him onto a stretcher. "Family can ride along," one of them offered. "We'll follow in our car," Sarah decided, knowing they couldn't all fit and unwilling to separate the children after such a scare. "The dog, too?" the paramedic asked doubtfully. "The dog, too," Mark confirmed through gritted teeth. "He saved my life. Again." As the ambulance pulled away, Chief Ramirez approached Sarah with something in his hands, a small blackened metal box. "We found this in what was left of your bedroom closet," he said. "A fireproof safe. It seems intact." Sarah took it with trembling hands. "Thank you. I had almost forgotten about this." Back at the hotel, while waiting for news from the hospital, Sarah opened the safe. Inside were their most important documents: birth certificates, passports, insurance policies, and a small collection of irreplaceable mementos. Sarah's grandmother's wedding ring, a lock of each child's baby hair, the handwritten letter Mark had given Sarah on their wedding day. "We didn't lose everything after all," she told the children, showing them the precious contents. Michael examined the safe curiously. "How did it survive when everything else burned?" "It's specially designed to withstand fire," Sarah explained. "Your father insisted on buying it when Emily was born," her voice caught. "He always wanted to protect us." "And now Max protects us too," Emily said, hugging the dog who hadn't left her side since they returned from the ruins of their home. The hotel room phone rang, Mark calling from the hospital. Sarah answered anxiously, putting it on speaker so the children could hear. "Clean break in 2 places," Mark reported, sounding groggy from pain medication. "They're going to operate tomorrow morning to set it properly. 6 weeks in a cast, then physical therapy. But you'll be okay," Sarah confirmed, relief evident in her voice. "Thanks to Max, I'll be fine," Mark answered. "If he hadn't pulled me out when he did?" The thought hung unspoken. They all knew how close they had come to losing him. Max knew what to do, Emily said confidently. "He always knows." After the call ended, the children settled into an uneasy sleep, emotionally drained from the day's trauma. Sarah sat in the armchair beside the window, watching them breathe, overwhelmed with gratitude that they were all still here, still together. Max patrolled the hotel room restlessly, checking each child before returning to the door, alert for any threat to his vulnerable pack. "You can rest now," Sarah told him softly. "You've done enough heroic deeds for one day." The dog looked at her with those intelligent eyes that seemed to understand far more than any animal should, then settled himself in the narrow space between the two beds where he could reach all three children if needed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: Mark's surgery, insurance paperwork, the long process of rebuilding their lives. But tonight, Sarah allowed herself to simply be grateful for what remained: her children, her husband, injured but alive, and the remarkable dog who had saved them all, not once but twice. 3 months after the fire, the Johnsons had settled into a rhythm of gradual recovery. They'd moved from the hotel to a small rental house, a temporary home, while their new house was being built on the foundation of the old. Mark's leg was healing well, though he still walked with a slight limp and relied on a cane for longer distances. The children had returned to school, finding comfort in routine and the support of friends, and Max had become something of a local celebrity. "I still can't believe they want to give him an award," Sarah said, adjusting Max's new collar, a handsome blue one that complemented his mixed-breed coloring. "The American Humane Hero Dog Award is a big deal." "He deserves it," Mark replied, watching as Emily helped brush Max's coat in preparation for the ceremony that evening. "Saving a family from a fire, then rescuing me from a collapsing building, that's above and beyond the call of canine duty." The ceremony was being held at the city's convention center, with local dignitaries, first responders, and the media all planning to attend. The Johnsons had been interviewed multiple times over the past months, their story and Max's heroism capturing hearts nationwide. "Do you think Max will be scared with all those people?" Jake asked, still protective of the dog who had saved them. "Max isn't afraid of anything," Michael declared with the absolute certainty of a 12-year-old. "He's the bravest dog in the world." As if understanding he was being discussed, Max looked up from Emily's brushing session, his expression somehow both dignified and slightly embarrassed by all the attention. "I think he'll be fine as long as we're all with him," Sarah assured them. "He just wants to keep his family safe." The family. Not their family or your family, but his family. Somewhere along the way, the distinction had disappeared. Max wasn't just a pet they had adopted. He was a full-fledged member of the Johnson clan, as essential to their unit as any of the humans. That evening, they arrived at the convention center to find it transformed for the ceremony. A red carpet led to the entrance, where photographers were already gathering to capture images of the hero dog and his family. Inside, a stage had been set up with a podium and large screen displaying photos of Max, including several from the hospital where he had steadfastly refused to leave Emily's side. "Wow," Michael whispered, taking in the elaborate setup. "This is like the Oscars for dogs." Max, for his part, remained calm amid the commotion, staying close to Emily as people approached to greet them. His only sign of discomfort was an occasional ear twitch when camera flashes went off too close to his face. Fire Chief Rodriguez arrived, resplendent in his dress uniform, and knelt to greet Max at eye level. "There's the hero of the hour," he said warmly. "You know, in 30 years of firefighting, I've never seen a civilian, human or canine, act with such courage." "We owe him everything," Mark said simply, his hand resting on Max's head. As they were being seated in the front row, a surprise visitor approached, Diane Porter from the animal shelter, accompanied by a distinguished-looking man in a business suit. "I hope you don't mind that we're here," Diane said. "We wouldn't miss Max's big night for anything. And this is Dr. Alan Roberts from the Canine Behavior Institute. He's very interested in Max's story." Dr. Roberts shook hands with the family. What Max did defies typical canine behavior patterns, he explained. Most dogs, even loyal ones, would flee a fire. The instinct for self-preservation is incredibly strong. For him to not only stay, but to actively work to wake each family member. It's remarkable. He's a remarkable dog, Sarah agreed, watching as Max allowed Emily to adjust the special bandana they'd bought for the occasion, blue with gold stars, a hero's colors. The ceremony began with speeches from local officials and first responders, including Chief Rodriguez, who recounted both the night of the fire and the later incident at the ruined house. Video clips played on the large screen, including news coverage and interviews with the Johnson family. When it came time for the award presentation, the entire family was invited on stage. A representative from American Humane read a citation detailing Max's acts of bravery before presenting a medal that was attached to his collar. "We also present the Johnson family with this grant of $5,000, the representative announced, "to help with rebuilding your lives and to ensure that Max has everything he needs for many years to come." There wasn't a dry eye in the house as Emily stepped up to the microphone, her small voice clear and confident. "Max is the best dog in the world," she said simply. "He saved us because he loves us, and we love him too. Thank you for giving him a medal. He deserves it." The crowd erupted in applause as Emily knelt to hug Max, who endured the embrace with patient dignity before giving her face a quick, affectionate lick. As the ceremony concluded and people began to mingle during the reception, Dr. Roberts approached the family again. "I wonder if you'd consider bringing Max to our institute sometime," he suggested. "We study exceptional canine behaviors, and Max certainly qualifies. It might help us understand how to identify and train more dogs with his unique protective instincts." Mark looked uncertain. "He's been through a lot. We all have. I'm not sure we want to subject him to tests and studies." "I understand completely," Dr. Roberts assured him. "It would be entirely on your terms. No stress, no separation from the family. Just some simple observational sessions. Max's abilities could help us save more lives in the future." "We'll think about it," Sarah promised, seeing the genuine respect in the doctor's eyes. "Max has certainly changed our perspective on what animals are capable of." As they prepared to leave, exhausted but proud after the emotional evening, a young couple approached hesitantly. The woman was pregnant, her hand resting protectively on her rounded belly. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, "but your story, it inspired us. We've been to the shelter 3 times this week looking for a dog like Max." "A hero dog?" Michael asked. The woman smiled. "A dog that needs a second chance. One that might not be perfect or purebred, but has a good heart." She glanced at her husband. "We're expecting our first baby in 2 months, and after hearing about Max, we realized that the right dog could be more than just a pet. They could be a protector, a guardian. The overlooked ones often have the most to give," Mark said, thinking of how close they had come to overlooking Max himself. "Just be patient. The right dog will find you, just like Max found us." As they finally headed home, Max rode in the back seat between Jake and Emily, his medal catching the streetlights as they drove. He seemed somehow more settled now, as if the public recognition had given him a sense of purpose fulfilled. "You know what today is?" Sarah asked quietly from the passenger seat. Mark glanced over. "Thursday?" she smiled. "It's exactly 100 days since the fire. 100 days since Max saved our lives." "And changed them forever," Mark added, watching in the rearview mirror as Emily dozed off with her head resting against Max's side, completely trusting, completely safe. 100 days since they'd lost everything and found what mattered most. 1 year to the day after the fire, the Johnson family stood on the front lawn of their newly completed home. The structure bore little resemblance to the house that had burned. This one was modern, with large windows and an open floor plan. But more importantly, it had been designed with safety in mind. State-of-the-art smoke detectors in every room, a sprinkler system throughout, fire-resistant materials, and escape ladders stored in each upstairs bedroom. "Well," Mark said, his arm around Sarah's shoulders, "what do you think, Max? Is it home?" Max, who had been sniffing around the perimeter of the yard as if conducting a security check, trotted back to the family and sat down, looking up at the house with what seemed like approval. "I think that's a yes," Emily giggled, kneeling to hug the dog who had become her inseparable companion. The past year had been one of both challenges and unexpected blessings. Mark's leg had healed completely, though winter weather still brought an occasional twinge. The children had shown remarkable resilience, though Jake still sometimes woke with nightmares of smoke and flames. Sarah had taken a leave of absence from nursing to focus on rebuilding their family life, only recently returning to part-time hours. And Max had become something of a therapy dog, not just for the Johnsons, but for the entire community. "Remember to bring Max's vest," Sarah reminded Emily as they prepared to head inside. "We have the school visit this afternoon." The vest in question was a handsome blue harness with patches identifying Max as a certified therapy dog. Following his heroics and award, he had undergone training and certification and now made regular visits to schools, teaching children about fire safety alongside local firefighters. "I still can't believe how good he is with the kids," Mark remarked as they entered their new home. "Even the rowdy ones quiet down when Max is there." "He's a natural teacher," Sarah agreed. "Something about him commands respect." The interior of the house still smelled of fresh paint and new carpeting. They had been able to salvage very little from the fire, which had meant starting over with furniture, clothing, and household items. The insurance money had covered the rebuilding and some basics, while the community's generous donations had helped with the rest. In the living room, a special display shelf held the few precious items that had survived: the contents of the fireproof safe, Max's hero dog medal, and a framed photograph of the family with Max at the award ceremony. But the most prominent feature was a large painting commissioned by Sarah's hospital co-workers, a portrait of Max standing vigilant against a background of stylized flames, his expression both gentle and fiercely protective. "Mail's here," Michael announced, bringing in a stack of envelopes. "More fan letters for Max." This had become a regular occurrence, letters from children, adults, and even other dog owners, all touched by Max's story. They came addressed simply to Hero Dog Max, Maple Street, yet somehow always found their way to the correct house. Sarah sorted through them, setting aside the bills and other family correspondence. "We'll read these tonight, Max," she promised. "Emily can help you write responses this weekend." The ritual of reading Max's mail had become a family tradition on Friday evenings. Emily would open each letter and read it aloud, then help compose thoughtful replies that Sarah would type up and send back, often with a paw print signature from Max himself. "Time to get ready," Mark reminded everyone. "The ceremony at the new fire station starts at noon." Today was special, not just because it marked 1 year since the fire, but because the city was dedicating its new fire station and naming the Fire Safety Education Center after Max. The Max Johnson Memorial Fire Safety Center for Children would teach generations of kids about prevention, detection, and escape plans. As they dressed for the occasion, Jake paused in the doorway of his room, watching Max, who had settled on the special bed they had built into the wall of the mudroom. "Do you think Max knows how many lives he's saved?" he asked his father. Mark considered this. "Not just ours, you mean?" Jake nodded. The shelter said adoptions went up 300% after his story hit the news, and now he teaches kids about fire safety. That's a lot of people who might not get hurt because of him. "I think on some level he understands that he's helping," Mark said. "Dogs are smarter than we give them credit for, especially this one." When they arrived at the new fire station, they found a substantial crowd already gathered. Chief Rodriguez greeted them warmly, leading them to reserved seats at the front. Max, wearing his therapy vest and looking particularly dignified, drew admiring glances and the occasional whispered, "That's him," from onlookers. The mayor spoke first, highlighting the importance of the new facility and the innovative Children's Education Center. Then, Chief Rodriguez took the podium, his expression solemn. 1 year ago today, a fire that could have claimed 5 lives instead became a story of hope, courage, and the remarkable bond between humans and animals. The dog we honor today didn't just save his family, he inspired an entire community to take fire safety seriously. He gestured toward a large display in the Education Center's entrance, a wall-sized photograph of Max with children gathered around him, learning about smoke detectors and escape plans. Since implementing our school program with Max as our ambassador, home fire deaths in our city have decreased by 40%. Families are installing smoke detectors, practicing escape routes, and teaching their children what to do in an emergency. That is Max's true legacy, not just the lives he saved that night, but all the lives that will be saved in the future because of his example. Emily was invited to cut the ribbon across the Education Center's doorway, with Max sitting proudly at her side. As the crowd applauded, Diane Porter from the shelter approached the family. "I thought you might want to see this," she said, handing them a glossy magazine. "It just came out today." It was the annual report from the American Humane Society, with Max's story featured on the cover. Inside was a 4-page spread detailing not just his heroism during the fire, but the ripple effect it had created: increased shelter adoptions nationwide, expanded therapy dog programs, and renewed interest in canine training for emergency response. "He's changed so many lives," Diane said, watching as Max patiently allowed a group of children to pet him, far beyond what any of us could have imagined when he was just another overlooked dog at the shelter. As the ceremony concluded and the ICE family prepared to give a tour of the Education Center, Sarah found herself momentarily alone with Max. She knelt beside him, meeting his intelligent gaze. "Thank you," she whispered, words that had been said countless times but somehow never felt adequate, not just for saving us, but for showing us what really matters. Max leaned against her, solid and warm and present, as he had been every day since the fire. In his canine way, he seemed to understand exactly what she meant. Sometimes the most profound heroes came in the most unexpected packages, and sometimes, Sarah reflected as her family gathered around them, the things we think we're rescuing end up rescuing us instead.